I would like to welcome everyone to our Autodesk Egle webinar. Today we expect to truly impress you with the latest additions to Egle version 9. But before we begin our presentation, I would like to cover a few slides. First, I would like to give thanks to those that are consistently participating in our forums. Special mentions, and I think Matt, you know the majority of these guys pretty well as well. So Rob, Rachel, Cameron, Sammy, Travis, it's a good possibility Travis might be in the crowd. Thanks everybody for your participation. We have a very active forum nearing almost 12,000 posts in just over 1 year. This feat couldn't be done without you and your cooperation. Thank you from all of us. You know, since Egle version 8 got released early last year, over 40 brand new implementations have been added to Egle. Enhancements and brand new features that actually take your design experience in a matter that has been implemented by Egle users. Today, we're taking it to the next level with adding Egle version 9. With Egle version 9, we've actually added some new navigation tools, routing assistance, attribute repositioning, and much more. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to go ahead and let you know how do you get Egle version 9. Version 9 is going to be available as soon as you launch it. Egle version 8 or anything earlier. You're going to get a splash screen in which you're going to have some links for your Mac, Linux, or Windows guys as well. In addition to that, if you don't already have Egle, you just go visit our website at autodesk.com/Egle, and there you're going to go ahead and see a download link where you could go ahead and download for Windows, Mac, and for Linux. Today, we're going to be joined by Jorge Garcia and myself, Edwin Robledo. We'll be ahead and manning the chat group. I'm sure many of you already know Jorge pretty well. If you've been part of Element 14 or the Autodesk forums, I'm sure you've already interacted with Jorge many times. But today, driving our presentation is our fearless leader and Autodesk Circuits Director, Matt Berggren. Matt has been leading the Autodesk Circuit development team for the last 2 years, which has been really paid off for our users, you know? And I think we could go ahead and pass this on to Matt. That way he could take us for the rest of the ride of Egle version 9. Can you pass it on to him, Jorge, please?
Of course. Aye, aye, Captain.
Thanks. All right. Looks like I've got it. Right. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So, everybody can see my screen?
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and hide this window. Shove this down in the lower right corner over here. Sorry, that's a WebEx window. I just want to try to make a little bit of room there. So, a couple of obvious things, you know, just to kind of kick things off. So, Autodesk, after the acquisition of Egle, really had an opportunity that we didn't want to squander. We've got an enormous user base with the Egle user base, probably the most popular ECAD or one of the most popular ECAD softwares on the planet. But with that came an incredible responsibility to try to improve some of the capabilities of Egle and really turn it into a piece of software that people enjoyed using. We did a lot of work to probe the user base, but likewise, you know, it's important to understand that pretty much everybody across the development team has used ECAD software before or builds electronics. That being said, you know, you can take a look at my Hackaday profile. You know, I build electronics on the weekends, but so does the rest of the development and support teams. And that's really driven what we feel like is a transformation in terms of how we approach designing ECAD software. You know, if we just ask the question, hey, you know, what are the repetitive tasks that are non-value-added tasks for users? We can find opportunity in a whole bunch of different areas. So a lot of the emphasis going into Egle version 9, and just to be clear, anybody who had Egle version 8 is just given Egle version 9 as a part of the normal subscription process. That's just part of subscription. So there is no upgrade cost for that. It's not like, hey, I'm on Egle version 6. What's the penalty for moving to Egle version 9? That doesn't exist anymore. Under the subscription model, it's the same cost. It doesn't matter whether you had a version 6 license or you had a version 8 license. You'll just download Egle version 9 and install it. So all the new features, functionality, everything that I'm going to show you today you've got available to you. If you're using the freeware version continues, and all of the functionality that I'll show you today is also available in the freeware version. So the same restrictions apply as far as the freeware is concerned. It's really restricted based on port area and layer count. There's no other restrictions that we're trying to layer on top of things. We don't have any intent to sneak in other restrictions. There's just no value in us doing that. The fact is that if you need something which is more sophisticated, you'll move up into one of those premium tiers of the Egle software. As far as pricing is concerned in the U.S., I'll use U.S.-based pricing just as an example. U.S.-based pricing is $100 a year for the standard edition, which is a 4-layer edition, and then $500 or $510, something like that, for the premium edition. You know, the price cannot be beat. And that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. I want to talk about some of the big productivity enhancements. So this is interesting because one of the features which came out of, or which went into Egle version 9 came out of exactly this design. I happen to have been designing a board around the Spartan 6. I was building it in Egle, and this is the Spartan 6 symbol here. I went ahead and broke it up into a bunch of different separate banks, which is very much how I like to design symbols. One of the discussions which was happening was, you know, every time that I began the process of wiring something, I would do this, draw a wire, then I would right-click on the wire, then I would go ahead and say, well, you know, I want to name the wire, and then later I would go ahead and place a label on it. Well, one of the things which is, well, hidden thing, I guess, that came into Egle version 8.7 was that we put a checkbox in here to automatically add a label. So if I labeled the wire, if I named the wire, it would just put me into label mode afterwards, so I could associate the label with the wire. That prompted a discussion, which was, well, why in the world do I even have to do that? 9 times out of 10, I'm naming the wire the same thing as what I'm naming the pin on the component. And so that began this discussion about, well, how can we innovate on some of the schematic wiring side? And that really led us into this notion of what we're calling quick connect, which sounds a little bit hyperbolic, but I promise is super, super valuable and is not nearly as hyperbolic as it may sound. So let me go ahead and just grab a couple of components here, because I think this is pretty cool when you see it also as a group. So all of these are subparts of the exact same component. If you assume that I want labels and names which will match the pins on the actual part itself, what we did was go ahead and add a series now of breakout tools on the components here. And you have some options here. First breakout option is to create unique signal names, which would be if I wanted to distinguish signal names for this particular part. So it would give you both a prefix of the part number, the gate, and then subsequently the pin. Or I can choose something like pin names. Otherwise, I can just choose, you know, generate some default signal. But if I choose pin names here, you'll see here that the software is smart enough now to evaluate the pin name, go ahead and apply a wire to it, then go ahead and apply the label to the wire. This is just incredibly fast and easy when I've got components and I have a whole host of sort of non-value added tasks. So, you know, again, if I right-click on a component over here and I just say, hey, you know, I want to go ahead and break these out, it would go ahead and break those out. Now, in this case, it's grabbing the names from the grounds over here because the grounds all have different names over there. But you can see here also the programming over here, the programming connection over here. Very, very easy to go ahead and break out a component and just have it automatically generate the wires and associate the wires and the names to those component pins. At that point, then it's super easy for me to go ahead and add a connector, go ahead and associate a bus with something, so on and so forth. So as we started to play around with that, one of the things that I tend to do, and this is something which I understand is not terribly common amongst the Egle user base, but is something that we're hoping to push moving forward, is I tend to group signals together into buses. So, you know, if I take a look here over at the JTAG bus, I would typically associate these 4 signals into a bus, and then I would try to move that bus sheet to sheet, document to document, whatnot, as a group. And that just allows me to work at a higher level of abstraction. Now, the traditional model for creating a bus in Egle is that I would sort of draw a bus and then I would go into the properties of the bus and I would edit the bus, and you would have just a field to type in what signals you wanted to include in the bus.
Yeah, using the name command, yeah. Use that,
yeah.
You'd have to memorize that name command with all those strings on it as well. Absolutely.
Correct.
Exactly.
And it was a little more than a box.
Yeah.
It was just a box.
Yeah.
It was just a field, that was it.
Just type some text, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Instead what we decided to do was say, okay, hey, look, can we, first of all, very few people who weren't Egle pros knew about the alias associated with the bus. So I'll give you an example of an alias. I can give a bus an alias, and then I can move it around with a name called JTAG, sheet to sheet to sheet. The JTAG colon there means that anything following the colon is going to be the signal that gets included in that bus. So, I can come here and say, hey, I want to go ahead and add these signals to it, and you'll see the nomenclature for this. Now, all of this is being generated automatically just by virtue of me plugging in the information over here and giving it an alias. Now I have a bus, which is called JTAG, and if I go ahead and label the bus here, you'll see that that's got JTAG on there. If I go ahead and break out the bus pins, I can say, well, I want to break out the bus signals, and you'll see now that the new breakout tools will allow you to very quickly break out the signal on the bus itself, like this as well. So breakout has been applied to the bus as well. But this idea of being able to create this one unit, which would be a bus, that allows me to go sheet to sheet or across a sheet and really organize things into these higher level elements, like a bus, helps me to work at a much higher level of abstraction. Now, one thing that we started playing around with was, if buses are themselves, let me go ahead and just move this down here a little bit. If buses are themselves going to be something that I want to start pushing within the software, start using within the software, we should probably provide a mechanism that allows people to create and store specific bus types. So one of the things that we added in Egle version 9 was the ability to create what we call persistent buses. And for those of you that don't know, any of these menu commands over here, toolbar items over here, which have a little downward pointing arrow next to them, if you just click and hold on them, they'll actually expose a whole bunch of stuff underneath them. And this is, this is not anything new to Egle. But you can see here that I can pick a set of recently placed components and just drop a new component in there. In this case, that library wasn't set up anymore. So, but I can drop a new component into my design just by virtue of placing a part that was a legacy part here. So as you start to place things, you'll accumulate this list of recently used items. And George and Ed, what are the most common things that you guys find?
So alternatively, alternatively, you can also do a right-click. Doesn't have to be a click and hold. A right-click will also work. Mm-hmm. Basically, the commands that support this, if you notice, you have the window command, so you can have like preferred views. If you have a large design, you can create little snapshots that you can jump to, kind of like frames that you can, specific areas you can go to. In the layers command, you can create aliases to quickly switch between views.
That's where I use it the most, for the layers. I have every combination you can imagine, like for Gerber outputs. That way I could preview it as well. Absolutely.
Right. Same for the add command. As you guys saw, the replace command has a similar history functionality. The value command keeps track of all the recently used values, so you can reuse. If you find yourself reusing values, that also holds. And then finally, the new one, the new kid on the block is bus, where you can reuse existing buses.
Yeah, so, when we jump into this new sort of bus workflow here, I can do things like, for example, create a persistent bus, something that I would actually store as a predefined bus. And I can say, well, okay, this is going to have TXV, it's going to have RXV, it's going to have CTS, it's going to have RTS. I can save these in here, save it as a predefined bus. And now that bus type is available to me anywhere that I decide that I want to use a new bus. So I can come here and say, hey, I want to create a bus for UART, and I click on it. Now I'll go into the properties of the bus, and you'll notice here that that bus then has all of the signals applied to it. So, at that point, if I wanted to break out the signals, I can simply right-click on the bus, say, hey, I want to break out the bus, and it would break out that bus with whatever its signals are on it. So super fast, super easy way to start moving groups of signals around in the design. The nice thing about the bus is that then you really do have this top-level sort of block diagrammatic view of the design. So I can look at things in terms of UART, SPI, I2C, most of the sort of interfaces or standard interfaces that I would use for something like a micro or an FPGA, something like that. Now, I want to bounce over to another instance of Egle. This is actually one that we used for development testing because I think there's some interesting things that we've gone ahead and added. And I showed these in some of the high-level videos that we did just as a part of the release. So since the addition of the buses here and this new model for buses, we also, for the breakout, we added the ability for you to connect both a bus and a component together, which will basically, if the bus contains the signals that are contained within the signal pins, it will actually connect those two elements together. So giving you an example, let me click on the bus here and click on the component, right-click and say connect pins to bus, and it'll break those out with the same names as whatever the pins are over here. Likewise, you know, I can come over here, click on the component. Oops, sorry, let me click on the bus first. Myself back in the group mode here. Click on the bus here. Click on the component again. Right-click, connect pins to bus. And in this case, it's giving me a warning because there's a bunch of signals which are not represented there. That's okay. Or signals which are already broken out on some other signal there. Not a problem. It's a warning. It's not really intended as a hard fast error at that point. You know, likewise, I'm going to right-click over the top of the part, connect the pins to the bus, no problem. Can also do it vertically. So super fast, super efficient way to break things out. You'll notice that with a lot of the normal sort of logic ICs or sensors, those sorts of things which have a standard sort of pinout, it's very, very common, again, that the signal names on the device itself or the pin names on the device itself will actually be what you apply to the signal itself. Now, in this case, I've got a few pins which I may not want to connect. For example, the null pins. And an opportunity also is here to select the specific pins that I want to break out. So I can organize the pins based on name, run down the list and say, hey, I'm going to grab everything which is here. Just run down the list here and grab these. And we'll go ahead and select my pins here, add my pins over here. And it'll go ahead and break out only those things that are relevant for that particular component. But again, a lot of the non-value-added tasks, the things where you spend an enormous amount of time, those are the things that we're actually evaluating. And it's happening because we're actually using the software. So one of the big advantages is that, as I mentioned, our development team actually uses the software and builds electronics on a daily basis. So in this case, this is my Spartan 6 design, and I wanted a better way to break up the Spartan 6 design. A little bit of discussion with the development team, and it translated into some features in the software that we think are super valuable. Now, I want to quick bounce over to another feature which is super cool in Egle version 9. I'm just going to.
If it's cool, before we jump to that one, wanted to also mention that you don't have to start from the bus. You can select a set of nets, right-click, and you also have the option to make a bus from the pre-selected set of nets. So it works both ways. Yep, true.
So go ahead.
No. So when you're drawing the new bus, once you selected all the nets, you'll get the property windows. That way you could go ahead and assign it an alias as well.
Yep, absolutely. So I want to go ahead and let's open up this design. And okay, so I want to show you one other thing that we played around with quite a bit. You know, as we were starting to build more sophisticated designs ourselves, we recognized that, you know, we had this legacy smash tool. And the workflow, which many of you are familiar with, is that you would click on a component, smash the component, then you would go ahead into the move tool, you'd grab a designator, and you'd hold the Alt key and kind of carefully do one of these things. And that
reference designator was not always easy to find either.
The text was never easy to find. Sometimes the reference designator would be off in La La Land. I mean, there was a lot of little interesting stuff. It was sort of imperfect as a part of that process. So we got to thinking, well, what is the user actually trying to do? And the fact is that the user is really just trying to reposition the attributes that belong to a component. I want to move name and value somewhere around the outside of the component itself. So with the new Reposition Attributes command, you've got a drop-down at the top, which allows you to select, pick between name, value, or name and value. The old smash only will just smash it, and you are responsible for moving things around. The other thing that we added, if I grab something like name and value here, is basically a 9-box grid off to the right. And this 9-box grid corresponds to positions around the outside of the part. So upper left corner, top middle, top right, so on and so forth. If I select name and value, and I select something like this, now I can just click on the part, and it'll move the text. And it's smart enough to know that name should be above value, so on and so forth. So it's got a little bit of intelligence built into it. It's also smart enough to understand that depending on how you place things, if I decide that I want to push something off to the side of a capacitor, that it should provide a little bit of spacing there, because that's the standard form, right? That's what a design should probably look like. And in this case, makes things much, much easier to go ahead and kind of clean up and get things positioned into a design. All of these things, again, are non-value-added tasks, but any good engineer or anybody who's aspiring to build a schematic which looks amazing is going through the process of manually doing this and spending an enormous amount of time to fine-tune something that we could do programmatically. So these were things that we just felt like, if we're really going to make Egle fun to use, we should go through the process of doing what other folks aren't. First of all, trying to position things, make things easier around the outside of the component, trying to organize how you break out wires, trying to handle how you break out pins, or even creating pins. If folks hadn't seen in 8.7, the ability to paste a list of pins from a spreadsheet into the library. All of those things are things that come just as a product of knowing how the software works, knowing what users are doing, and then going ahead and using it that way. So, if I bounce over to PCB here for a second, the same rules apply in PCB. So, if I need to position component text, component designator, any of those sorts of things, again, the Reposition Attributes command is available in PCB. I can choose either name, value, or name and value. And depending on the position that I choose, I can go ahead and push part position or push designator information somewhere around the outside of the part itself. So if I decide that I want to move this down here, if I decide that I want to move this down here, I can move all of those things around very, very quickly and easily. Really simple, easy way to go ahead and clean up your design. So the nice thing is that if the components have a very similar geometry, something like resistors, capacitors, that sort of thing, you'll find that they align, the text will align very closely adjacent to those things, but it'll be consistent for all of those parts. So a lot of that time that you spent going in there and using the move tool and sort of slowly kind of doing one of these, say, well, I want this designator to be right here, and then the adjacent designator over here, I want to try to get those two things lined up. All of that is sort of handled for you in a simplified way. And it can be applied to a group of objects as well. That being said, that kind of brings us into the PCB environment. And I want to note one of the big standouts in PCB, which is the addition of the Design Manager panel. One of the things that we recognized was oftentimes you would load a board, you'd have a whole pile of components sitting out here. You'd have nets and air wires and tracks and all sorts of other content and resources that you were looking for inside of the design, and you needed some way to navigate it. So the addition of the Design Manager allows me to basically cycle between devices and signals. So I can grab from all devices here all of the components that are in the design. I can see, I can select them in the editor. I can delete, but obviously delete has some limitations there. If I've got a schematic open, I'm not going to be able to delete a part. If I just want to work on top and bottom side parts, I can view the things that are on the top side or the bottom side of the board. I can filter those things out. You've got options here both to select and then also to zoom the object. You also have an option up here for signals, and under the signals here you can see the various signals in the design. Now down below you've got a list of all of the primitives that belong to those symbols. So all of the elements, including tracks, pads, vias, everything that really belongs to that signal is individually selectable down here. You also have the ability then to do things like apply certain certain operations on top of that data. So if I right-click and say rip up, I could rip up, for example, just that track. I could, and you can see now the air wire that shows up here. I also have the ability, and this is one thing that we really wanted to try to sort out, was the ability then to grab these things over here and very quickly jump over to, for example, like the change menu, the align menu, these other sorts of things. So the design manager by default should come up on the left-hand side. We did that very deliberately because we wanted the design manager to be closely coupled with any of the commands that you might want to launch over here. So anything that I select in the design manager is selected over here. And if I went to the change menu here and I said, hey, you know, I want to go ahead and change this so all of the names are exposed on those components, I can go ahead and do that, and the names would get exposed on those components. So I've got a lot of capabilities that are accessible to me just by virtue of being able to select them in the editor and then quickly use either the change command, align tools, copy tools, so on and so forth to add to either add or edit objects. Some interesting things. Let's just go ahead and I'm going to use the rip up command here. And yeah, we'll come to that. But I want to use the rip up command here because I want to talk about other features, capabilities, things that the design manager has afforded us. First of all, this sort of bird's eye view of a design coupled with the new quick route tools gives me the ability to very quickly interact with signals in the design. And quick route, I sort of glossed past that and just made something awesome happen there. But I'll do something a little more deliberate here so you can see. The quick route command can be launched from anywhere inside of the software. I'm going to go ahead and just quick route these signals here. So I'm launching quick route directly from the panel over here. I also have the opportunity to rip up those signals over here. I want to just really quickly here.
There's two functions going on right there, Matt. Besides the fact that you're finding it, you're actually able to quick route in basically just a couple of clicks. That's it. Right.
Right. So likewise, the ability to rip things up. Now, for example, if I say, well, hey, I've got a series of tracks here. What's the deal with these tracks? Is there some other operation that I can do on this? I could come in here, go ahead and change the width and say, hey, I want the width of these tracks to be 12 mil, something like that, and I could go ahead and change those tracks also. So you've got a lot of capabilities, interesting capabilities, which are available using the design manager. Now, I want to just jump into very, very briefly. Let's go ahead and zoom out here. I want to talk a little bit about two things that I just glossed over. One of which is the enhancements to the rip-up tools. Historically, you needed to know some secret sauce command line tricks to be able to do things like rip up all of the polygons in your design. Now, Ed and George, amazing guys, totally know all of those tricks for you. Totally happy to answer whatever questions you guys have on those.
We call them spells.
No wizardry.
But,
no.
Exactly. But for the non-Egle expert, me, there were a number of things that I was always looking for. Can I quickly rip up all the polygons in my design? And yes, you could. It was like rip up, at, semicolon, hit enter, and all the polygons would go away.
Spot on.
Other things, yeah. I mean, I'm now indoctrinated into the inner circle. The other things that we recognized were that there were a lot of other things like in the rip up command that could have been better. For example, I may want to rip up a top layer connection over here, but I want to leave the route from the bottom layer in place. Or maybe I want the top layer connection here, but I want the bottom layer to be ripped up. There were a lot of things that just weren't sort of considered as essential or weren't terribly flexible. So the historical model, you would sort of come in here and click and click and click and click and click and click. And there was a lot of this sort of faithfully finding your way through to click on something. And then you'd accidentally click the air wire and say, oh, I just ripped up everything. Dang, let me undo, 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 undo. And so we decided to just make this whole process much, much cleaner, much easier. So a couple of commands have creeped in. One is rip up connected copper. I click rip up connected copper, it rips up everything along the length of that conductor path, okay, top and bottom layer. And you also have rip up connected copper on the same layer, and that's basically based off of the layer of the object that I click on. So if I click on bottom layer, I can just rip up that connection there, but then none of this top layer stuff gets ripped up. So I don't have to go through the process of either click, 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 or click, rip up everything, and then reroute the whole thing. Another command that we added over here, which I think is pretty sweet, is ripping up the actual signal itself. And that'll rip up everything, including the polygons. So, you know, if I rip up something like ground, we'll just go ahead and clear the polygons for a second here. If I rip up something like ground, you know, I'm going to end up with, ripping up, well, anticlimactic there. I'll end up ripping up any polygons or anything that were associated with that. In this case, oh, this is a different ground. Okay, a little anticlimactic there, but you take my point. So ripping up anything which may be associated with a big polygon, or you've got lots of polygon connections, you've got lots of ground connections, so on and so forth. Really, really easy for you to go ahead and rip up the whole net. So there we go, I found a ground track. Very, very straightforward to do. Likewise, we added things like ripping up connections between components, because oftentimes if I decided, hey, you know, I've got this processor, that's fine, but, you know, I'm going to rip up the connections between that processor and let's say, you know, this connector over here. It's relatively straightforward then for me to say, I want to change that connector. And let me go ahead and move my fiducial out of the way here. And I'll grab my
right click, and you'll pick the complete.
Yep, there we go, and find our hotspot here. There we go, and rip up all the connections in between that component. So I could replace and rework this connector fairly quickly. It's probably more common if you're going to do something like rework a sensor or something like that. That said, let's go ahead and take a look quickly at some of the other stuff that we've added. So in addition to the rip-up tools, we went ahead and added some big improvements on the routing side of things, which are using the quick route tools. So here you've got your traditional sort of Egle interactive router. This is the router that includes obstacle avoidance. This is a push and shove router. These three you should be familiar with if you've sort of tracked with what we've done with Egle up until this point. These additional 4 icons up here in the toolbar are what we call quick route. This is a new routing paradigm within Egle, and it's something which I think everybody should hopefully be happy to see occur on the Egle side. So I'm going to rip up the board just so we've got some routing to do here. The first quick route option over here is to quick route an air wire. And so, you know, if I zoom in over here and I just say, hey, I want to quick route this connection here and this connection here, it just seemed easy to us that we could complete some of these sort of non-critical connections really fast, really, really easily. The quick route air wire is designed to make life just super easy for these non-value added connections. So, you know, if I click here and I click here, I can route those connections over there. And click here, again, route those connections over there. I don't really have to think about the connections that sort of don't add a lot of value in my design. Again, you know, any of these very simple, straight, point-to-point connections, very easy to quick route those using quick route airwire. Now, if it's a little more sophisticated, it's got multiple nodes on the net, something like that, and you're saying, hey, you know what, I'm fine with quick route just taking a shot at that signal. I can click on something, click here, and the quick router will route that whole signal. So in this case, that signal is not just the air wire, but there's multiple air wires along the course of the signal path. One thing which is super, super powerful is now the addition of this quick route multiple connections. So if I come here and I say, you know, I'm going to grab these pads over here, I can hit enter, and it will automatically route all of the connections from one point to another. So It will also do things like try to join the connections together in meaningful ways. So I don't end up with just garbage routes. I end up with routes that actually look very similar to how I would have routed things. So it'll try to group things together. It'll handle trying to equalize the spacing. You can see here it tried to be consistent as far as the spacing was concerned. Over here it didn't necessarily need to. But it really does try to do its best as far as getting the routes in there and making sure that it actually looks like something that you would be comfortable with. Just one other example on this. Let me go ahead and rip this up. Rip up everything over here. Go ahead and rip up the signals and then zoom in over here. I can use quick route, grab the connections over here, and we'll just say, I'm going to grab this group of pads, hit enter, and you'll notice here that it'll also work on parts which are also rotated. So there's not really a limitation in terms of part rotation or things like that. It's pretty intelligent how it works. It also works on things like differential signals. So if you've got a bundle of differential signals, let's say that you've got 8 diff pairs that you want to route from one part of the board to another, it can also work on differential signals, and you would use the bundle router, and that would work there. One final point on this: if, as I'm routing something, I go through the process of just using the normal routing command here, and I start clicking, and I'm sort of over here, and I kind of come into an area over here, something like that. You have options here now where if you just hit the enter key, it'll complete the route for you automatically. So, if I sort of start something here and I say, well, I'm going to hit enter, it'll just go ahead and complete the route, with whatever the most sort of obvious connection would be for that particular connection. So, designed again to be super simple, super easy to use, very, very straightforward. The enter key, in some cases, like in this case, it needed to go back the other direction there. So, it's got a little bit of teething. Just the idea there is to try to make a lot of these simpler routes much, much easier for you. So that being said, I think those are probably the primary features other than the cleanup. And I want to show you one last thing, which I think is super powerful, super, super easy, and again, designed to make the process much, much better overall. So for those that don't know, one of the goals in terms of routing a board is always to try to minimize track length, try to remove non-orthogonal connections, try to remove things like acute angles. The smooth signal command here is designed to really evaluate routes and then try to do cleanup on those routes. So in this case, you saw that there was a whole variety of connections up here which were sort of had extra signal length. Aesthetically, you could argue, well, oh, but that bundle's closer to this, and so that kind of looks better. But the physics of it are actually not better. The physics are always better when we've got something which is a shorter track length. So in this case, the cleanup has the ability to shorten track segments, and we'll look to try to remove a lot of those additional jogs in a track segment. It'll also look at things like this, and you can see here how it straightens up those connections over there. Lots of really cool, really powerful kind of cleanup glossing passes that we can run on top of connections on the board. And again, this is just intended to make it much, much easier for those of you who are going through the process of kind of faithfully tidying up your design and saying, hey, I really want to make this look amazing. We can go through and do some cleanup on things, reduce some of the additional segments, reduce some of the additional jogs in these connections over here, and just make the design look better without you having to do a whole bunch of work. So you'll see it even has the ability to clean up those non-ortho connections. And again, it's going to take a lot of length out of the routes in your design. These sorts of things are the tools that we hope are going to contribute to your productivity. There's a lot of work still left for us to do, but it's a lot of stuff that we're going to continue to invest in really trying to make design not just easier, but actually a little more fun than maybe it's been in the past. So that being said, I don't have more to add. George and Ed, did you guys want to add anything else?
I just wanted to add, Matt, with the combination of the quick route and the rip-up tools, what I've noticed is that if you have a workflow between Egle and Fusion 360, when the mechanical engineer actually moves those parts and you get it back in Egle, you know that your traces are totally out of whack. So it actually makes it much easier for you to now rip them up and just go ahead and quick route it before you shoot it back to the mechanical engineer.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and definitely.
George, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is, you know, we don't want to, like you were mentioning, we're not gonna secretly add restriction, but we're not beyond secretly adding more freedom. You know, many users are not aware that now you can be offline for 30 days instead of 14, which was what we originally announced. You can now be offline for a month without hitting the Autodesk servers. So that can help those who maybe are traveling constantly. You now have a month instead of 14 days that you can be offline.
Yeah, good point. Good point. That was a big addition. You know, we recognized that there were a number of users who said, look, you know, with a 14-day timeout, that's just not enough for me. So I'm not going to move forward. For those of you that are interested in trying out Egle version 9 and not quite ready to move ahead, also keep in mind that Egle does include the ability to save a copy for Egle version 7, which will allow you to export data then to Egle version 7 and roll back to a previous version of Egle if that's something that you're interested in. It also guarantees that you've got some interoperability with people on the team. If you've got people within the organization that still haven't moved forward but you wanted to give Egle version 9 a try. So we've tried to build in a variety of different parachutes for those of you that have concerns, questions about moving forward. Some obvious questions which always come up, well, what if I create a design in a premium version? Will I be able to open that in a legacy version? So on and so forth. You know, we solved that problem. Will I be able to open a design created in a premium license, but now I've fallen off of subscription? Yes, you will. Yes, you can still generate curver files from it. Yes, you can still print it out. You need to put things into the areas of the board in which you have a license for that area. So the editing capabilities are really wide open for those users. So
I'd like to open it up to some questions that I think somebody's asking me if they could post questions. So and while you're doing that, Matt, I'll let, if anybody has any questions, will I go ahead and take care of them now?
Yeah, I'm just having fun with the cleanup tools now. So.
Okay. Well, Matt does some playing with the smooth operator there.
Yeah, exactly. Send the design back.
And remember, guys, that we still have our free version, so you can always evaluate Egle with no risk. For those of you who haven't tried Egle or haven't decided to dip your toes in the Egle waters yet, feel free to also download our free version, which is available on the Autodesk website.
If you have any questions, go ahead and either you could raise your hand and put it on the Q&A section, or just go ahead and put it on the chat, and we'll take care of it immediately. If we'll have Matt demonstrate how it works, if it's possible. Mm-hmm. No questions so far yet.
They'll come in. They just got to find the Q&A section.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the best part that I've seen on the device manager was the capability of selecting a group of traces and beef them up. That really was a big time saver, big time. Yeah. Because selecting them was not an easy task by itself.
So we have our first question came in. It says, does the cleanup respect the grid? And I think the answer is no. It does not adhere to the grid currently.
Correct. I think, and you know, that's, I want to be clear kind of what that implies, because I think one of the things that historically the Egle user base depended on a lot was the grid to maintain clearances. Remember, Egle prior to Autodesk didn't have collision detection or obstacle avoidance interactively as a part of the routing process. So historically, users were very much dependent on the grid. Now, I know that this can get into a sort of religious argument about, yes, but still I wanted to observe the grid, still I wanted to adhere to the grid, so on and so forth. A lot of that behavior was really a product of or a lot of that necessity was really a product of the fact that Egle just couldn't handle obstacle avoidance. And with the new interactive router, we have the ability to avoid obstacles, wrap around obstacles, those things, and maintain clearances. That, I understand that for some people, following the grid is absolutely a must-have for them. There are certain restrictions that we're going to run into just simply by virtue of the fact that we're trying to make these things faster, a little bit more efficient. So it won't follow the grid at this point. No, most automated routing these days is trying to go gridless as a way of finding paths. I mean, that's the nature of topological routing, is to try to find better paths and to open it up so you're not restricted to the grid, so you can find more options there. I understand the limitations and the frustrations with some people. Hopefully, you'll find a way to use it for the things that are essential for you.
Okay, so we got a few other questions popping up. This next one is about multiple items when pointing with the mouse instead of hitting the next option. So for this user, Daniel, there's actually many ways to do selection, and we are going to have some improvements on that. But what you can do now, as far as doing selection, if there are multiple items in the same area, you don't have to pick the next option. You'll notice that sometimes when Matt was working, the cursor changes to the 4 cardinal directions, and you can right-click the cycle. There is, in a future release, we are considering that idea of a pop-up menu with adjacent items. I believe that's part of what some of the selection improvements include. But for right now,
you're not supposed to say that.
Matt can say Matt can get away with saying, what's coming out in 2 versions. Why can't I say that?
Yeah, exactly. It's the top, right? So definitely, there's a lot of work that we're doing there. To try to improve selection, and the work that we're doing on the selection side is going to be pretty impressive. I'll slack George on that one and say, yes, absolutely, that'd be some pretty amazing things coming on the selection front.
Yeah, for sure. However you like to work selection-wise is pretty much going to be supported coming up. So stay tuned to that. If you like the list of adjacent items thing, if you like the quick cycle select with just right clicks, there's going to be, all the options are going to be available. But even now, Daniel, you don't have to do the whole next option thing. You can just left click wherever multiple items intersect, and then you'll see the cursor change, and you can right click through the various items. It'll go from smallest to biggest, and then left click to confirm the object you want. There's also an Alt option where you can hold Alt and start left clicking, and you'll see that it'll cycle through all the nearby items. So there's many ways to handle selection with nearby items right now.
You can see now, if I hold Alt, it's basically cycling through what's selected and what's not selected at the coincidence of the 2 objects. The other, as George mentioned, is you've got Next there in the right menu. You can just right mouse, left mouse, kind of interplay down there, and the taskbar down below will show you what your options are as far as selecting different objects. Probably easier to see on the PCB side of things when you've got a number of coincident objects on board. But there's a number of different options that are in there for sure.
There's also, are there improvements in the selection and search of library elements? The selection is constantly improving. We have a team dedicated to improving Egle's library and adding parts constantly. The search engine is still currently the same one, where you have to keep in mind the use of wildcards. So if you're used to using Google, it doesn't quite work the same way. So in that sense, it hasn't changed, but that's also.
But there are enhancements that are happening. So for example, like when I'm in the table of contents view, you can now see that we're highlighting things like the package, 3D package, and the symbol, all from the table of contents view. We will improve search for library components from within the add dialog. So from within the library versus within the add dialog, there hasn't been a lot of work on search within the add dialog yet, but they're there will be an overhaul of search on the dialog side as well.
Yeah, that's what Pablo, I believe, is asking. Pablo, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. We have a few more. Can the design manager jump to from a component in the schematic to the board and vice versa?
Not yet, not yet. So design manager only exists within the PCB today, but yeah, I'll just park it there.
Well done.
Coming to a schematic near you.
Yeah, so there's two sides, two sides of that. Obviously we know that from the design manager, you're going to want to be able to right-click on something and cross-probe into schematic, so that'll come. That part will come. The other side of that is, should we build design manager and schematic? I think there should be something which is the equivalent to design manager and schematic, whether that's the design manager or it's something somewhat different. That really depends on what feels best from a UX standpoint.
Okay, any other questions, guys?
I know we've covered a lot of material. We're going to do our best to have the
hold up.
The recording. Oh, okay, cool.
Okay, yeah. So it said this is from Heisem. During the quick route, I see that when you hit enter, it defaults back to the minimum segment size. How can we keep the width of the trace the same?
So that's something that we'll definitely log and get sorted out, where we can follow with whatever the current width of the track is.
We have here in the schematic, do the pins have to be on grid to be labeled automatically? No, it doesn't matter really what grid they're on right now.
Yeah, correct.
Thanks for the continued work in Egle. It took me 6 months to change from 7 to 8. And I am pleased to see how Autodesk is caring about customers. Thanks, Ricardo. We really appreciate that.
Thanks, Ricardo. That's awesome.
That's super cool.
Let's see. Also, for the vias, is there an improvement on removing pads on inner layers that are not needed? Not yet, Heisem, but that's also in the plans.
Not yet, but it's on our list. We'll probably address it first at the CAM level, and then subsequently at the design level.
Similar to Heisem's original question on quick route, any way to override and have it use a different width instead of what it's dropping back to?
So I think what it's using is basically your standard route width, right? So
yeah, the DRC minimum width is what it's falling back.
Exactly. So not yet, but there's plenty of option for us to do that. It's super straightforward for us to implement.
So
saying that with the developer probably on the call right now, who's sitting there saying, "Well, it's straightforward for you to do it."
Yeah, he'll be happy to hear you. Top form.
Yeah, exactly.
On the multi-signal quick route, is it possible to specify constraints, maintain separation for impedance control and length for electrical matching? Coming.
We're getting there. There was a lot of stuff that we wanted to do in advance that would speed us along as quickly as we could. We didn't want to hold back on some of those capabilities that we felt were just super valuable for the users, but we will get there. So, our hope would be to get to a place where we've got the ability to really address directly issues of things like PDR routing, and that includes things like link-tune differential signals, doing bundles of link-tune differential signals, so on and so forth. So it's on our radar, and none of us on the development team are unfamiliar with what's necessary on that front. We're all pretty skilled in terms of what the more sophisticated user is looking for.
Okay. Would love to be able to import component placement done in in DXF.
Component placement done in DXF, I don't know about. Yeah. IDF, I could imagine, and I think there's value in that. I think DXF, because we don't really kind of know component placement from DXF. We don't really have There is a concept of a component in DXF, or a thing that we can kind of identify as a component. I'd have to unpack that one a little bit more to try to understand it. The ability to bring in something like IDF information and get component placement, that would make a ton of sense. That's something for us definitely to look into.
Okay, here's a good one. How do you generate the ohm symbol? So, Lawrence, so yeah, basically what the easiest way to do it, Lawrence, is to go into a text editor, enter the ohm symbol like in Word, and then do a Control-C and copy it into here. That's the easiest way. Otherwise, you have to know what the shortcut is on your OS to include into the text.
You have to hit the Alt Control belly button in the code.
Right, something like that.
me being the Mac user here, with Mac, Option Z will provide the ohm symbol just as part and parcel of Mac. So Option Z provides the ohm symbol. I can say, 50 ohm impedance. So that's actually mapped to a keyboard shortcut on Mac. Now, Windows can do the same thing. It's going to be an Alt key plus some numeric key combination. But on Mac, it's Option Z, and then there's a number of other sort of standard mathematical symbols which are mapped on Mac that are super helpful. So micro is Option M, ohm is Option Z. So if you think ohm as impedance, M as in micro, that's how I remember them, and that's great if you're on Mac, but obviously if you're on Windows, there's it's a little different.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah. We support the ohm, and I believe we support mu, and I think there's one other that we support officially in Egle. Is there work to have DRC ignore the net class when the minimum size and separation are different? Could you clarify that a bit, Haitham? Unless Matt or Ed understand exactly what he's asking, but I'm a little unclear.
Yeah, net class when the minimum
size and separation are different. Yeah, because the thing is, Haitham, both net class and DRC are always defining minimums. The interaction is which minimum is stricter. So it's not that DRC and net classes have priority one versus the other. They're the same class of citizen. The issue is which one is stricter. They're both defining minimums. That's why whenever we see a user modify the default net class, we cringe, because the idea of the default net class is to stay at all zeros. That way all the minimums specified in DRC are winning. So the DRC is in control of the default net classes. The moment you start to tamper with the default net class, now you could potentially be overriding DRC. So that's a very fundamental interaction in Egle between the DRC and the net class, and one that I've seen that some users don't immediately catch or don't immediately recognize that they're the same level of constraint. They're just competing with each other on which one is stricter because they're defining minimums. So which one's larger?
Yeah, but like I showed there, just really briefly on the screen, I think, Haitham, it's pretty obvious kind of where we're going with this. So we did include, as a part of signals within the design manager, the ability to define net classes. So I can come here, create a new net class. We'll just say, analog as an example. Then I can grab all of my analog signals, basically everything that starts with an A. In this case, it's pretty anticlimactic because it's only a single signal. I can use the change command, come to classes, apply that to it, and now analog has A in attached to it. One of the big moves for us going forward is going to be to bind design rules more tightly with net classes and try to create a really strong relationship between classes of objects. I'll go beyond net classes, but classes of objects of some particular type, and the rules that then get applied to those things. So it makes it much easier then to do sort of selectively adding objects to a group and associating a rule to that group than it is to assigning rules to each individual object. So as we move forward, just expect that net classes will take on much more of a role as a first-class citizen. I think they're sort of underplayed within the existing Egle, and I don't think they're fully appreciated how powerful they can be. So we'll go through the process of really strictly defining ways to work with net classes or component classes or object classes or whatever we call them, to allow you to apply a whole range of different constraints. But rules is high on our priority list. It's something we've got to do.
So recommendation from the support team, please don't change the default net class. Stay away from that field, please.
That's a long-term rule, and it's one of the ones that is still held up despite, you know, the changes. Since we haven't touched that, that rule still holds. Do not mess with the default net class.
Yeah, leave it alone.
It is sacred and holy. Do not mess. And then you know what's funny? If you look at Hexapod, Hexapod has the default net class change, or the Arduino board has it.
Of course.
So you know, we need a good example to test with.
Yeah. So, we got a suggestion from Jeff. Why not add clickable common EE symbols in the text entry dialog? So that's a suggestion to. I'll log that one after the webinar.
Yeah, something down here, maybe, you know, just a list of standard engineering symbols. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, an interesting idea. You know, treat them like swatches, maybe in a color palette. Yeah. Something for us to think about, for sure.
And then thank you, Kevin, for giving us the shortcuts for Windows. It's Alt 230 for Mu and Alt 234 for Ohm.
Awesome.
Okay, let me see what else. Can one insert JPEG or PNG images on the layouts? Currently, no. Right now, we support bitmap import for company logos and stuff like that. I defer to Matt on what's going to happen with that right now.
Yeah, so there'll be some work that we're going to do on that. I think, you know, the ability to embed a vector image or at least convert a vector image to, you know, keep in mind that PCB is not a vector editor. And so the kinds of images that you're going to generate are not going to be necessarily easily embeddable into a PCB and then scaled. So we've got to do some work to make sure that we can make those things both easy to embed, but then also scalable. And that's one of the challenges with bitmap today. There's a lot of hatching of bitmaps, or, you know, we could convert bitmaps to polygons if we wanted, but at the same time, scaling those things is an issue. So, we'll take it under advisement. It's something that's definitely been requested multiple times in the past, and we'll do our best to try to implement those things.
Okay. So
no guarantees as to, you know, when that happens, but you know, we'll see where we end up.
So the next one's a biggie. What's the difference between saving a managed library with a classic save button and pushing a version to the cloud? Are saves carried through to the PCB and models to get get pushed to Fusion? So this is a little bit of an involved response, but I'll give you kind of the short.
The rundown, yeah. Give them the short and skinny. That one.
Short and skinny of it. So basically, as you know, the managed libraries are a fundamental paradigm shift in Egle, especially if you're used to using the old library system or the classic. A classic save saves the library locally, and it works as Egle has always worked. Okay. When pushing a version to the cloud, okay, the managed library is more than just pushing a version to the cloud. Managed libraries are what power the ECAD-MCAD integration right now, for the most part. That's where you can assign your 3D models. They're also going to be, in the future, the means to share content easily between teams, between other Egle users. So there's a lot of a fundamental infrastructure being built behind them. So when you make a save to your managed library or to your Egle library locally, you still have to update the design. Okay. In Egle, we do not have this automatic change in the library goes to any design that uses that library. There's a lot of danger associated with that type of paradigm, simply because if you have a design that's already being manufactured, you don't want it to be changed without your knowledge of it, just because you update it.
Leave control to the user. Let the user control that. So
the user dictates when a design updates to use the latest version of the library. So I think that answers the question.
Well, I want to add one other point on that, which I think is important to kind of understand, which is that you do have a lot of flexibility now, a lot more flexibility in terms of your ability to edit a managed library. So from the control panel, you have the concept of managed libraries, and within the managed library dropdown, you've got the option, or managed library tree, you've got the option for My Managed Library. Those libraries you can still edit, you can still modify, change, so on and so forth. the content that you create can be modified by you locally and then pushed as a version up onto the cloud. The idea is that the cloud should serve as the canonical reference for whatever the current state of the library is, but there's no reason why you can't make changes to that device. So, you know, I can go ahead and add additional packages from the web. I can import a 3D model either locally or from the web and associate that with a component. I can modify components and add additional models to them. So, you know, in this case, I've got 3 that happen to have a 3D model associated with it. If I wanted to go ahead and, I don't want to create a new one. I could create a new one.
That's
but if I want to add, for example, yeah, it's another webinar. But if I wanted to add something like an 0402 to this particular capacitor, I could do that. Now, in some of these, they're pretty horrible because they look like just little boxes here. But, you know, I can grab the Chemet 0402, go ahead and say, you know, C0402K, associate that now, and now that's associated with that component. So now, once I save that, I can place that part from my managed library into my design, and it will automatically have the linkage then to the 3D model when I push the design over into Fusion 360. Because I've made the association here with a piece of managed content as a part of the managed library. So one of the big changes, which happened not with Egle version 9, but after the initial release of the managed library, was a better interplay to be able to associate models to components locally. Now they're not really local. They are, in some cases, cached locally, but the relationship between the 3D model or the transformation matrix, the insertion matrix between the 2D coordinate space and the 3D coordinate space, all that is stored in the cloud. So you do have much more opportunity to kind of handle the interplay there. If I save this library, then from here I can go ahead and push a new version and push the new version up to the cloud. That component would then get updated, and the next time that I decide that I want to go ahead and use that in the design, I would have access then to a version of the 0402 part, which would have that 3D model attached to it. So whether you create packages that way or you associate an existing package that way, you do have the flexibility to be able to do that. So I want to be clear on that because I think the initial release of managed libraries felt probably artificially restrictive, and we understood that. But we didn't want to delay the opportunity to link the ECAD data with the MCAD data in Fusion. This subsequent change is really where we're creating a much more flexible, much faster, much easier workflow. So in this case, what it did was push the library to the cloud. The capacitor is now listed over here. When I look at 0402 cap, the chip capacitor 3D model is over here. I think the thumbnail is just caching at this point. But that 3D model is then associated with that component. So if I place the 0402 into my design, it would work with that 0402. Oh, sorry, here's 0402K, my fault. Clicked on the wrong one. So now this whole library has been updated just by virtue of pushing that different version to the cloud. But the point is that the canonical reference to the library should be stored somewhere. And if you are going to make changes to those things, they shouldn't be made lightly. It's, I think, the strong position that Egle has always maintained, which has actually driven some of the behavior in Egle, like in a schematic, I'm not able to just right-click and modify the part in the design, right, or grab a pin and move a pin from here to here. The library is sort of treated as sacrosanct, and we limit the editing that you can do directly on an object in the design. And we're going to continue to follow that model. I think the library is still a very strong, sort of strong and strict environment. But I think we can do better ways to introduce you to the option of editing something in the library. And once that workflow, once you sort of understand that workflow, it's pretty fast and easy. So this design I modeled yesterday got 3D models associated with all of the components. And it's basically a variation on the LilyPad design from SparkFun. And that took me, you know, all told, I want to say maybe an hour to get everything modeled in 3D, and then I could push the design over into Fusion 360, and all of the components had their 3D models associated with them, other than maybe my resonator, because I was a slacker and didn't want to draw a resonator. So.
Excellent. So there's another question here. Any chance we can select which layers appear in the manufacturing tab? That's for future improvement.
So in terms of these layers here, top side, bottom side, individual layers over here, I think we can.
I think he's referring to like inner layers, like if you have a multi-layer board, be able to see inner layers.
But adding more to this list over here, yeah, I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't do that.
Yeah, but it wasn't this intended initially to give you a real view of the board. I mean, if you want to see the inner layers, wouldn't you do that at the CAM processor? That's available.
Yeah.
Might
So
not be a
in
bad
the CAM processor, I think we can do, I think we could probably stick some inner layer stuff in there. I don't know that there's any hard fast rule why we couldn't. But I take your point.
You see, there you now you can see them here, correct? Yeah.
But still, I think there's no hard fast rule why we couldn't just do
absolutely, sure.
Next
something
one.
for us to think about.
What's the state of import for polygons and board shape from DXF? Currently, board shapes you can import from DXF. They do work. It just requires the DXF to be perfect. In other words, there's no margin of error in the outline. If you're off by a fraction from being a perfectly closed contour, then that import doesn't give you a perfect board shape.
Yeah, there's two elements in that, though. I think it's so you need a closed boundary. That's one aspect of that, and then the other is that it doesn't support splines.
Correct.
And that's something for us to explore. But Egle's arcs today are basically slices of a circle. And so there are limitations in terms of what we can do with things like elliptical arcs, those sorts of things. If you explode splines within whatever the original authoring tool is, then what it's going to do is approximate those arcs. The problem that you can face with that is then the endpoints are not necessarily coincident. And that can create some problems in terms of calculating the board shape boundary. But there's work that we can do on that front to improve just board shape in general.
Yeah. What I've been doing is I've been importing them to Fusion.
And then export as polyline.
Use that extend command that they added to it. That way I could close them, and then I could import it from there in the Egle is what I've been doing lately.
Yeah, because Fusion has a good export for polyline-based DXF, which we support perfectly, and that one works. As far as importing DXF fills as polygons, you currently have to rely on existing ULPs. Definitely there's been talk of being able to convert contours to polygons within Egle, but that command hasn't been implemented yet.
Cool.
Okay, let me see, is there anything else? Like the names and values. So I have a question here, but I'm not, could you elaborate, Denial or Daniel? Sorry if I'm butchering your name, I apologize. Regarding which layer? So the names, there's a names layer, T names and B names, top and bottom. And then, regarding which layer of manufacturing tab? So you're saying the silkscreen layer? Daniel, is that what you're referring to? Yes. Okay. You can control it. You can hide it where it's at the top, I think, right? We can change the color or something.
Yeah, so you can change the color. It's still pretty suboptimal. I think we can do a better job of hiding the silkscreen color if you wanted there. So yeah, I mean, you could pick an existing color like the green that's being used in there. I tend to do a lot of boards with a black background and white solder mask. Just a shout out to my friends at Hackaday. I tend to do a lot of this sort of design, and then the black versus white there. I guess I could conceivably go in and change the silkscreen color to black if I really wanted to hide the silkscreen color. It's a little suboptimal. I don't think it's ideal, but we can probably do a better job of providing some tools for that.
Yeah. So Daniel, you'd have to do what Matt just did now to not see it in the preview. You'd have to, for now, turn it off by making it the same color as the background. Yeah, that's what he was asking.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else? I've jumped between both QA and chat because sometimes they put it on chat, sometimes they put it in QA. But I think we've got everything answered.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody taking the time today. I know we ran long, but we didn't want to leave anybody with any questions left to answer. And of course, you know, hats off to George and Annette. I absolutely could not have done this webinar without you. You guys are my rock, man. These guys have done an amazing job supporting the Egle community, and a big hats off to these guys for being very active in terms of both the forums as well as Egle support channels. If you guys have questions, they go to all of our inboxes. We all look at them. So post them on the forums, post them through the support channel, and we'll get you sorted out.
Hey, Matt, I want to thank you for taking out of your busy work schedule and driving this webinar for us. The insight, of course, is as amazing as usual. And of course, and for leading and continue leading our developers with new and exciting innovations for our users. So thank you very much, greatly appreciate it. And those that of the developers that did participate and are able to join us today, thanks for being here, thanks for your support, greatly appreciate it. And also I wanted to give kudos to our developers because of their active participation on our forums directly themselves. So even though you may be getting a response from somebody, you know, that person just might be one of our developers answering your question. So kudos to them as well. So I think we've reached the end. There's a lot of material here. We'll try to make this recording available to everybody as soon as we can on our YouTube channel. Please visit it often as we update tutorials as well as webinars on there as often as we can. We went a little over the time, but I think it was way worth it, okay? So any final comment, George?
Will there be a webinar on working with just the libraries and finding parts and building parts? Or is there a recorded one somewhere? We have several recorded up on our YouTube.
But I think it would be a good idea for us to go ahead and host another one, Jorge, in the next month. I had been planning about it. I actually had sketched it out, but with the whole new managed library, I think we have some good material to introduce library.io as well to that one as well. So yeah, we'll go ahead and plan that out and send out invites as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. But just in the meantime, you'll have something. So if you go to the playlist, there's a playlist for library creation. Yep. So you can go there and you can see a lot of that is still valid for the manual creation of parts. Mm-hmm. So you can totally go off of that.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Creating parts here, and yeah, there's for those that are interested, if you're looking for just summary detail, if you want to share stuff around, there is a playlist now for Egle version 9, which has a series of videos that you can share around, and each one of those kind of covers some of the topics that we talked about today.
Yep. Everybody's asking for the recording, so we definitely got to get those in quick.
We'll get that as fast as we can, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, again, for your participation. Greatly appreciate it. Matt, kudos. Jorge, thank you as always. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.